I came home after a long trip and found a woman I hardly knew screaming at my new driveway gate. She was just in her slippers and a towel. She wasn't only yelling. She was kicking the gate and shaking the bars like it was a jail, she shouted, about how I was trapping the whole community. I hadn't even brought my suitcase inside yet. And there she was, the neighborhood's top Karen in all her glory, saying my private driveway was for public use. She claimed my new gate was a danger to everyone's freedom. That's when I knew that putting up this gate was the start of something big. What Karen didn't know was that I had proof on my side. I had the property deeds, the camera footage, and the patience of a man who had put up with silly HOA rules for years. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. This was war. Just 2 weeks before, the idea of a gate wasn't even on my mind. I live on the edge of a neighborhood with a homeowners association, or HOA, but my house is actually just outside the official line for the HOA. Still, the HOA had always tried to boss me around, telling me what to do with my house, my yard, and even the color of my mailbox. Most of the time, I just ignored them, but things changed when I came back from a work trip. I found deep tire tracks all over my gravel driveway and a new dent in my old 1970 C10 truck. That's when I decided I had had enough. My driveway had become a shortcut for the whole neighborhood. People were using it to make fast U-turns, cut through the end of the street, or park for parties across the road. It was my private land, but they didn't care. So I decided to send them a clear message. I hired a local company that was good at making nice, simple gates. We designed a clean, black metal gate that opened by itself and had a keypad to get in. It wasn't anything too fancy, no sharp spikes or anything like a castle. It was just a modern gate to keep my property safe. They put it up in 1 day. The installation was smooth and there was no mess. The keypad connected to my phone, a camera turned on when it sensed movement, and the metal arms of the gate swung open in a slow, smooth way that I found very satisfying. The moment the last piece was welded and the gate turned on, I stood and watched it close. I felt a great sense of peace. That peace lasted for exactly 40 minutes. I was still on my porch with a cold drink when I heard the first scream. It was Karen, of course. I could hear her flip-flops slapping on the street as she ran toward my house, waving her arms. She was holding some papers like they were important legal documents. She stopped right at the gate and stared at it as if it had done something mean to her. Then she started to yell, "You can't do this," she shouted. "This is against the rules for the neighborhood." I just sat there and let her yell for a minute. I was hoping she would get tired and go home. But then she took out her phone and started taking pictures, yelling, "This is going in the HOA file." That's when I got up and walked down to meet her. Karen is the kind of neighbor who makes clipboards look bad. She wears vests with too many pockets, acts like the property lines are country borders, and calls herself the acting compliance director. It's a job title she made up for herself at an HOA meeting that most people didn't even go to. I got to the gate and was very calm. "Hi, Karen," I said. "It's nice to see you. Just so you know, this is an HOA property. And yes, I have the papers to prove it." She waved a fake badge at me like she was a police officer. "You can't just put up walls wherever you want," she yelled. "That gate blocks the way for emergency vehicles." I smiled. "Actually, it helps. The fire department has the code to get in." "You don't." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then she turned and stomped away, mumbling about rules and lawsuits. By the time the sun went down, 3 of my neighbors had come by to say how much they liked the gate. They all told me their own stories about how Karen had bothered them over little things like garden gnomes, the height of their trees, or their flagpoles. It felt like my gate had become a symbol of standing up to her, a little fort against her bossiness. But the next morning, I woke up and found a huge pile of dirt dumped right in front of my gate. My security camera had recorded someone in a hoodie doing it around 2 o'clock in the morning. They were shoveling it out of the back of a pickup truck, but the license plate was covered. It wasn't hard to guess who was behind it. I spent the morning cleaning it all up and then called the police to file a report. They said they couldn't do much since I couldn't see the person's face or license plate. Meanwhile, Karen made things worse. Over the next 3 days, I got 7 different notices from the HOA. They were for things like untrimmed bushes, the wrong paint color on my house, and loose gravel on the sidewalk. One even said my garage light was too bright after 10 p.m. It was ridiculous. I hadn't done anything to my house in months. I knew she was doing this just to get at me. It was personal, and she was trying to wear me down with paperwork until I gave in. What Karen didn't realize was that I had already done my homework. When I bought my house years ago, I had my lawyer check the property lines very carefully. And there it was in black and white. My property started 6 feet before the official HOA line. That meant everything past my mailbox was legally mine. It wasn't shared, it wasn't common, and the HOA had no right to make rules about it. That included my whole driveway. I printed out copies of my property deed, highlighted the important parts, and put them in a folder by my front door, so when I got a letter from the HOA's lawyer telling me to stop, it was clear it was written by someone who hadn't even looked at the property map. I simply replied by sending them a packet with all my documents and a short note that said, "Request denied. Please check your own maps." That night, I saw Karen pacing back and forth across the street, looking very angry. At one point, she held up her phone and shouted something about taking a neighborhood poll to get things back to normal. I just ignored her, but when I went out for groceries later, I came back to find the gate's keypad had been smashed. Someone had hit it with a hammer. The gate still opened with my phone, but you couldn't type in the code anymore. I checked my security cameras again. This time, I saw someone hopping my fence from the direction of Karen's house. The video showed it happened at 3:17 in the morning. I filed another police report and also got better cameras with higher quality video. If Karen wanted a fight, I was ready to give her one. What had started as a simple gate to stop a few joyriders had now turned into a neighborhood war. Karen wasn't just mad that I had protected my property. She was angry because it took away her invisible power. For too long, she had ruled our block with her clipboard and threatening newsletters. And this gate, this simple set of metal arms and a keypad, had stopped her both in reality and as a symbol, but she wasn't finished yet, not even close. I knew her next move would be a big one. It would either be her last mistake, or she would do something so desperate that she'd go completely wild. I just didn't know how far she would go to try and get control over something she never owned to begin with. Tonight, after the keypad was smashed, I was sitting on my porch with a hot cup of coffee. I was very sure I needed to get ahead of whatever Karen was planning. The new camera footage clearly showed her teenage son jumping my fence in a hoodie. And even though you couldn't see his face perfectly, you could see the shape of his truck parked around the corner. That was all the proof I needed. I didn't go talk to them directly, not yet. I knew how Karen worked. She loved to argue and loved to play the victim when anyone stood up to her. What I needed was not another fight on my lawn. What I needed was more proof and to be patient. So I made a plan. I put up 2 more cameras. One had night vision and was hidden in the oak tree looking at my driveway. The other one faced the side yard, which was the way Karen's son always snuck through. I also installed a second keypad in a hidden box near my mailbox, just in case they tried to break it again. And then I waited. It didn't take long. For days later, I caught something even stranger than just another person trespassing. Karen had been using my driveway as her own personal shortcut to get to a path behind her house, but this time she was very bold about it. It was broad daylight, and she had sunglasses on. She walked across my gravel like it was a public sidewalk, not bothered at all, like she had every right to be there. And she wasn't by herself. Her friend, who was a real estate agent, was with her, holding a clipboard and pointing at the property lines while writing notes. I watched them from my upstairs window, completely confused. Then her friend took out a phone and started taking pictures of my house. That's when I understood. Karen wasn't just mad about the gate. She was trying to build a case that my driveway was breaking some bigger rule. Maybe she was trying to say it was on community land or that it was blocking a public path. I knew it was nonsense, but I also knew Karen would go to great lengths to twist small things into big lies to fit the HOA rules. That afternoon, I decided to look deeper into it. I went to the county office and asked to see every document about my property, the HOA's property lines, and any old building permits. It took hours of looking through dusty old files and searching on the computer, but I found it. It was a plan from almost 10 years ago. An old HOA proposal to build a small road that would connect two parts of the neighborhood. And that road was planned to go right over what is now my driveway. The county had said no to the plan because of problems with the land and because it was on private property. But someone, and I was sure it was Karen, had never given up on the idea. I felt a chill go down my back. This was never just about my gate. This was about her wanting control. She had talked herself into believing my driveway was a public path, even though it never legally was. That night, I posted a simple summary of what I found on the neighborhood Facebook page. I included a picture of the rejected road map and a short note making it clear that my driveway had always been private. I didn't use Karen's name. I didn't need to. Within minutes, people started commenting. One neighbor joked that maybe they should all get gates to keep Karen out. Another asked if this meant all the fines they had gotten from her over the years were not valid. Someone even offered to repaint my garage for free just to go against the HOA. It was obvious that things were changing, and Karen knew it. An hour later, my post was gone. It had been deleted without any warning, and when I tried to post it again, I found out I had been blocked from the group. That was a classic Karen move, silencing anyone she couldn't control. The next morning, things got even more serious. A new letter was in my mailbox. This one had an official HOA seal on it. It was a demand to remove the unauthorized security structures from the community's view. With it was a blurry photo of my gate, taken from a weird angle to make it look bigger and scarier than it really was. The letter threatened me with daily fines of $200 if I didn't take the gate down. I laughed out loud. They were bluffing. They had no power over my driveway, and they knew it. Still, I decided to reply. I sent an email to the HOA office with scanned copies of my deed, the county's official map, and the letter showing the road. Plan was rejected. I finished the email with one simple sentence. I suggest you talk to a real lawyer before you take this any further, but Karen didn't give up. She got creative. That weekend, she organized a neighborhood visual compliance walk, something the HOA hadn't done in more than a year. I saw the group from my window. There were 6 or 7 people walking slowly past every house, taking pictures, writing notes, and pointing at things like roof lines and bushes. When they got to my gate, they stopped. One of the men, who looked to be in his mid-40s with a clipboard and a sunburned neck, walked up and put a bright red sticker on the gate post. I stepped outside and asked him what the sticker meant. He told me his name was Ryan and he was with Visual Compliance Support. I asked for his ID. He didn't have any. I asked if he was a licensed inspector. He wasn't. He said he was Karen's nephew and was just volunteering to help with the rules. I stared at him for a second, then I peeled the sticker off the post and dropped it at his feet. I told him to get off my property before I called the police. He backed away quickly, and the rest of the group awkwardly turned and left like kids who had been caught doing something wrong. The next few days were quiet, but it was a strange kind of quiet. It felt like the calm before a storm. I kept checking my cameras, expecting some other late-night trouble, but nothing happened. Then, one evening, a neighbor knocked on my door. His name was Pete, and he lived a couple of blocks away. He looked nervous and kept looking over his shoulder. He handed me an envelope and whispered, "You didn't get this from me." Inside was A printed email conversation between Karen and a few of the HOA board members. She was trying to get them to officially classify my driveway as a path for the whole community. She had made up a story that years ago there had been a verbal agreement with the man who owned the house before me to keep the driveway open for everyone. The problem with her story, that previous owner was my uncle, and he had been in a long-running argument with Karen over a sprinkler head of all things. There was no way he would have ever agreed to that. I reached out to my uncle, who now lived in Arizona. I asked him directly if he had ever made any kind of deal with Karen about the driveway. He laughed for a full minute and said the only deal they ever made was that she was not allowed to talk to him anymore after she threatened to call the fire department on him over a leaf blower. I asked him to write that down in a statement, and he was happy to do it. I added it to my growing pile of evidence and printed out copies for good measure. By now, I had everything I needed. I had legal deeds, security camera footage, county maps, and statements from witnesses. Karen had nothing but her nerve and a clipboard. I knew she wouldn't give up easily. People like her almost never do. Her next move would be big, desperate, and reckless, and I would be ready for it. I didn't just want to win this fight. I wanted everyone in the neighborhood to see her for who she really was, not someone who cared about order, not someone who was a stickler for the rules, but a bully with too much time on her hands and not enough respect for others. And the best way to beat a bully isn't to yell louder, it's to be smarter, to have more proof, and to let their own actions bring them down. The gate was never just about the driveway anymore. It had become a line in the sand, and Karen was about to cross it for the very last time. The next HOA meeting was on a Wednesday night. I knew this was my chance to end this completely. Karen had spent weeks trying to twist the truth to fit her story, but I had something she didn't have: facts, support from my neighbors, and the truth on my side. She had called for a vote on non-compliant structures, wording it in a sneaky way so most people wouldn't know. The whole point was to force me to take down my gate. But I had my own plan ready. What she didn't expect was that I would not only come to the meeting, but I would come prepared, calm, and ready to let her expose herself in front of everybody. I got to the community center 10 minutes early and sat near the front with my folder full of documents. Karen was already there, walking around the room like she was running for office. She was shaking hands, putting on a fake smile, and whispering to people. But I could see she was tense. She looked over at me more times than she probably wanted to. I gave her a polite nod, but she didn't nod back. People slowly came in and sat down. The usual boring feeling of these meetings was gone tonight. There was an energy in the room, a feeling of suspicion and curiosity. It wasn't every day the neighborhood got to see a real showdown instead of the usual boring talk about garden complaints and parking lots. The meeting started with the normal topics: budget updates, new landscaping ideas, and planning for community events, but the mood changed when Karen stood up and dramatically tapped her papers on the table in front of her. She announced her motion to vote on the immediate removal of all unapproved security structures that posed a visual or physical barrier to neighborhood unity. I almost laughed out loud. It was so obvious what she was doing. A few people turned to look at me, and Karen didn't even try to hide that she was talking about me. She held up a blown-up photo of my gate on a poster and said it had become a symbol that was dividing the neighborhood. When she asked if anyone wanted to discuss it, I calmly raised my hand. The HOA president, a quiet man named Greg who looked like he wished he was anywhere else, reluctantly let me speak. I stood up, cleared my throat, and passed out packets of my documents to the whole board and to a few interested neighbors in the front rows. Inside each packet was my property deed, the surveyor's map showing the HOA property line, papers showing the old development plan was rejected, and even pictures of Karen trespassing on my driveway with her real estate friend. The very last page was the letter from my uncle, the old owner, clearly stating that no agreement had ever been made with the HOA to use his driveway. I kept my voice calm and explained the situation. I reminded everyone that my property was outside the official HOA zone, so no HOA rule, regulation, or vote could overrule the law. I read right from the county's official property report, using the exact language and measurements. Karen tried to interrupt me twice, but Greg stopped her by just raising his hand. Then I talked about her claim that I was dividing the community. I pointed out that the real division came from unfair rules, targeting certain people, and giving out fake citations that had no legal reason to exist. The room was completely silent. Then I played the video. On the screen for everyone to see was Karen walking up to my gate, banging on it, and yelling about fines and calling me an arrogant landhog. The next video showed her nephew putting the red sticker on my property, followed by a short clip of her son in a hoodie sneaking into my yard and breaking the keypad. Karen's face turned bright red. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for anyone at all, to support her. But no one said a word. She tried to change the subject. She claimed the footage was edited and taken out of context. She claimed I was tricking the neighborhood. With my tech toys and legal talk, I didn't say anything. I just handed Greg a flash drive with the full and edited videos and told him he could check it for himself. Greg looked tired. He rubbed the sides of his head and then did something no one expected. He called for a vote. Not on the gate, but on whether the board should do a formal review of Karen's behavior, her history of giving out fines, and whether her made-up role as compliance director was valid. The motion passed easily. Even her closest friend, a woman named Diane who had once complained my lawn was too aggressively green, didn't vote against it. Karen stormed out of the meeting before it was even over, muttering about being betrayed and filing a lawsuit. Nobody followed her. People stayed after the vote, looking through the documents I had given them. A few neighbors came up to me, shook my hand, and thanked me for standing up, not just for myself, but for the whole block. One older man even told me he had stopped letting his grandkids play outside because Karen kept giving him tickets for their chalk drawings on the sidewalk. The illusion of her power was gone, and people were starting to see the truth, but I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight, and sure enough, the next day, she sent a flood of emails to the board. She claimed she was being harassed, that her character was being attacked, and that the meeting caused her emotional trauma. She even attached screenshots from my security camera and accused me of illegal spying, completely ignoring the fact that the cameras were on my own private property. Greg responded with a short, professional message confirming that the official review of her actions had already been approved. That same evening, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't Karen this time. It was Lauren, a retired judge who had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago and was quickly becoming one of the most respected people on the board. She introduced herself, smiled warmly, and handed me a printed report she had been asked to put together. The report showed years of fines Karen had given out. Many of them had no paperwork or legal reason behind them. One homeowner had been fined $75 for fence shade intensity. Another had gotten a ticket for using unapproved bird seed. It was obvious that Karen had been running her own little kingdom. Lauren told me the board was thinking about getting rid of the enforcement committee that Karen had started. I asked what would happen next. She smiled again and said that depends on how far Karen wants to push it. The answer came fast. Within 2 days, Karen was holding a community protest in front of my house. She set up a folding table at the end of my driveway with homemade signs that said things like "Resist the gate" and "No fences in Freetown." She even brought a speaker and played loud marching band music, acting like she was leading a revolution. At first, it was just her. Then her nephew came. Then a random teenager who I'm pretty sure was only there for the free lemonade, she shouted. A car's driving by, asking for support and accusing me of dividing the neighborhood like the Berlin Wall, but the only response she got was a few car honks and a lot of strange looks. What she didn't know was that two local news reporters had heard about the story. It seems someone from the meeting had posted about it online, and it had started to go viral. The headline was something like, "Neighborhood Woman Melts Down Over Man's Driveway Gate." It did not make her look good. When reporters called the HOA for a comment, Greg simply said they were looking into it. Karen's protest ended by the end of the weekend. By Monday morning, her table was gone, the signs were down, and the only thing left of her revolution was a crumpled banner in a nearby trash can. But if anyone thought she had given up, they didn't know Karen. What she did next was her most wild and dangerous move yet. It was the moment she went from being delusional to being completely obsessed, with her power officially taken away by the board and a review of her actions underway. She started acting on her own, outside of any HOA rules. No titles, no meetings, no fake authority. It was just pure chaos, all while she pretended to be a good citizen protecting the neighborhood. Her new mission started with flyers, hundreds of them. She printed them herself, made grainy black and white copies, and put them in every mailbox. On the street, each flyer had a blurry picture of my gate with the headline, "Is this the future of our neighborhood?" Underneath were long, rambling sentences accusing me of trying to take over property, making the neighborhood less safe, and destroying community trust. At the bottom, she had written a quote from herself and signed it, "Karen, former compliance director, and justly removed." Most neighbors just threw them away. A few left them crumpled in her yard. One neighbor even taped the flyer back on her door with a sticky note that just said, "Nope." Still, Karen kept going. She started following delivery trucks that came to my house. She would stand across the street with her phone up, filming them as if she was building a legal case. One time, she shouted across the road that my Amazon driver was trespassing on disputed land. The poor guy looked so scared he sped off, knocking over my recycling bin on his way out. I had to call the delivery company and file a complaint, just to get her to stop bothering the drivers. Then came fireworks night. Our city had just allowed private fireworks for the 4th of July weekend, and a few neighbors decided to have a small party. I didn't plan on going, but I did step out onto my driveway to watch from a distance. The night was calm, you could hear laughter down the street, and for once it felt like a normal, friendly neighborhood. That's when Karen struck again. Without any warning, she ran into the middle of the street. She started yelling that the fireworks were a fire hazard and that my gate had created an echo chamber of sound danger. Nobody knew what that meant. She pointed at my driveway and accused me of aiming noise pollution right at her windows. When people laughed, she called the police. The officer who showed up was polite but looked completely tired of it all before he even got out of his car. I calmly showed him the sound level reading from my outdoor noise meter, which I had installed after Karen's last round of nonsense. The reading was well within the city's legal limit. The officer nodded, gave me a little smile, and walked over to Karen, who was now flapping her flyer in the air like it was a search warrant. Their conversation didn't last long. She waved her arms wildly, pointed at my gate, and then at the sky. The officer just turned away and walked back to his car without saying another word. She stood there, frozen, still holding the flyer as if she had forgotten it was in her hand. The next day, everything was quiet. Unusually quiet. Karen wasn't pacing on the sidewalk. There were no new flyers, no yelling. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a pause before a big storm. Sure enough, 2 nights later, just after midnight, my gate camera sent an alert to my phone. I checked the video and couldn't believe my eyes. Karen was back. This time, she was behind the wheel of her son's truck, revving the engine at the end of my driveway. At first, I thought she was just trying to make a scene and scare me. But then the truck shot forward. It didn't stop. It slammed into my gate at full speed with a loud, metallic crunch that echoed down the street. The whole gate shook, but it held strong. The reinforced concrete posts and steel bars did their job. The truck, on the other hand, was a complete wreck. Karen jumped out, stared at the damage in horror, and then, to my complete shock, she ran. She sprinted down the street in her bare feet and disappeared into the darkness. I stared at the footage, completely stunned. Then I called the police. By the time they arrived, the truck was still there, crumpled like a soda can with the engine hissing. I gave them the footage without saying a word. The officer took one look and said, "We know exactly who this belongs to." The news spread fast. By the next morning, the video had been shared in 3 different neighborhood group chats. Some people called it the Great Gate Showdown. Others called it Truck versus Steel and joked about making baits. But no one was laughing when Karen was officially placed under investigation. Not only had she committed vandalism, but she had done it in a truck registered to her son, which created even more legal problems for her. The insurance company refused to pay for the damage when they found out the crash was on purpose. Her son was furious. They had the truck towed away before the sun came up, and by noon, Karen had gone into hiding. Meanwhile, the board finished their review. Lauren delivered the results in a letter sent to every home. Karen had made up fines, used small amounts of HOA money for her own needs, and used the neighborhood newsletter to silence anyone who disagreed with her. Her actions were called a gross abuse of power. All the old tickets she had given out were officially dismissed, and people who had paid the fines were given the option to ask for their money back. It was a total takedown of her self-proclaimed rule, and it felt like justice had finally come. Karen's house, which was once perfectly clean and polished, started to look like no one was taking care of it. The grass grew long, her flowers died, and her window blinds were always closed. Nobody saw her for over a week. Rumors started to fly. Some said she had run off to her sister's house. Others said she was trying to find a lawyer, but none of it mattered to me anymore. The damage was done. Her control over the neighborhood was gone, and the gates were still standing strong and damaged, and now seen by most of the community as the line that saved them from her madness. What I didn't expect was for the local newspaper to hear about the story. Apparently, one of the neighborhood kids had made a compilation video of Karen's biggest meltdowns, complete with sound effects and slow-motion edits. It went viral. The paper ran a story with the headline, "Local HOA Drama Ends with Truck vs. Gate Showdown," and suddenly, people from outside our neighborhood were laughing about it too. A late-night talk show even made a joke about it. In less than a week, Karen went from being a local bully to an internet joke. She tried to get the videos taken down, but by then, the internet had already moved on to making memes and remixes. One version even had her yelling about property lines over a trap beat. The board decided to host a community party 2 weekends later to help bring the neighborhood back together. There were food trucks, music, and lawn games, the works. They even asked if I would be willing to speak for a few minutes about what happened, to encourage people to know their rights and the rules of the HOA. I politely said no, but agreed to help set up. That Saturday, as families gathered on the grass, kids ran around with glow sticks, and neighbors laughed freely for the first time in months. I stood back with my arms crossed, watching the new president greet people warmly. I was finally seeing what a community was supposed to feel like. Karen was never officially seen at the party, but a few people swore they saw her watching from behind her blinds. A part of me hoped she did see it, not to be mean, but because ... Well, just because ... The week after the party was the quietest the neighborhood had been in years. People walked their dogs without constantly looking over their shoulders. Kids played in their front yards without being suddenly yelled at for breaking some made-up rule. Even the HOA newsletter, which used to be full of strict demands and hidden threats, came out with a cheerful tone, offering lawn care tips and a schedule for a potluck. It was like a thick fog had lifted from the whole block. The change was so huge that it almost felt unreal, like the whole neighborhood had woken up from a bad dream. And in a way, it had. That dream was called Karen, and now she was just a bad memory, hidden behind closed blinds with a ruined reputation. I hadn't seen her since the truck incident. Her house stayed strangely lifeless, with the curtains always drawn and her once perfect garden now full of weeds. Some people said she was still inside, hiding from everyone. Others swore she had left town. Her car was gone and her mailbox was untouched. Still, a few of the more curious neighbors, especially the ones who had been targets of her anger, kept watch. Not to be mean, but because they just couldn't believe that the woman who once ruled with a clipboard and a mean stare could just disappear. And even as things got back to normal, there was still one question in the air: would she try to get back at me? At first, I thought the answer was no. Then the envelope appeared. It was hand-delivered, slipped under my door one morning. There was no return address and no stamp. Inside was just a single sheet of paper. There were no threats and no demands, just a typed note that said, "I hope you're happy. You destroyed everything." I folded it up neatly, put it in my drawer, and let it sit there. Maybe she wrote it out of guilt. Maybe it was the last little bit of her influence trying to find its way back. But either way, it had no power over me anymore. Whatever Karen had destroyed, she had done it with her own two hands. All I did was hold up a mirror for everyone to see. The board officially announced the results of their review. Karen was permanently removed from any role in community matters. All of her old titles and privileges were gone. Her fines had already been paid back to the neighbors she had wrongly targeted, and a new policy was put in place. It required every fee and every expense to be documented and checked by at least 2 board members. It was the kind of check and balance that should have been there all along, but it was better late than never. The board also published a community rights guide. It was a simple booklet that explained the real legal boundaries of the HOA's power compared to a homeowner's rights. I was asked to help look over the draft before it was published. I agreed, and I did it quietly and carefully, without trying to make myself the center of attention. Then, out of the blue, Karen's house went on the market. A for sale sign appeared overnight. There was no open house and no flyers. Just a simple sign stuck in the lawn like a white flag of surrender. People gathered across the street, whispering. Someone joked that they were half expecting Karen to have set up booby traps in the house on her way out. But within a few days, the online listing for the house was gone. It had sold just like that. For cash with no strings attached. The new owner turned out to be a retired police sergeant named Clark. He had spent 30 years on the force, dealing with everything from hostage situations to, as he put it, suburban Karens. When he introduced himself to the neighbors, he did it with a big smile, a firm handshake, and a joke about finally being in a quiet neighborhood. I couldn't help but laugh. Clark and I became friends right away. He asked about the gate and its story. I gave him the short version, just enough to paint the picture. When I told him how Karen had used her fake authority to bother the whole block, he just shook his head and said he had dealt with a dozen people just like her in his career. Then he looked at my gate and grinned. "You mind if I get one of those?" he asked. "We can link them together. Make it a neighborhood alarm system." I nodded. 2 weeks later, Clark had his own gate installed. It was a little taller than mine and had a welcome sign that read, "This property is under retirement protection." By then, the neighborhood had become a symbol of quiet rebellion. People started making small improvements to their homes, things they had always wanted to do but had been too afraid to while Karen was watching. One family put up a tree house, another painted their shutters blue. Someone even brought back the garden gnome trend that Karen had banned 3 years earlier. It was like a creative energy had been set free. Nobody went crazy, and nobody ruined the look of the neighborhood. Everything was still nice and respectful, but for the first time, people were decorating their homes for themselves, not to get The approval of someone with a fake badge. The local news outlets came back to do a follow-up story. The tale still had life online, especially after a YouTube channel with millions of followers featured the footage of Karen's truck hitting my gate in a funny reenactment with actors. They contacted me for interviews, but I said no again. I wasn't looking to be famous, I just wanted peace. Although, I have to admit, watching an actor in a leopard print robe scream at a driveway gate while a voiceover yelled, "Freedom to U-turn," made me laugh harder than I had in months. Despite everything, there was one thing I kept to myself. The moment I saw Karen that one last time, it wasn't at her house, and it wasn't on my street. I ran into her at the grocery store in the paper towel aisle of all places. She looked different. She looked smaller, not in her body, but in her presence. She had no makeup on, no clipboard, and none of that self-important attitude that used to cling to her like perfume. She saw me, froze for a second, and then quickly looked away. For a moment, I thought about saying something, but I didn't. I just got my things and walked past her. It wasn't out of spite. It was out of a sense that it was finally over. There was nothing left to say. Weeks turned into months. The gate was never touched again. It stood like a quiet guard at the edge of my property. Every time it swung open or closed, it reminded me of that strange journey. It reminded me of how something so simple could cause so much chaos and conflict, but also bring a community together. It had become more than just a structure. It was the moment the neighborhood stood up and said, "Enough, no more fake rules, no more fear. No more Karen." Eventually, I added a small sensor light to the gate. It played a little chime every time the gate opened. Not a loud siren, not a buzzer, just a calm little tone. It reminded me that not all fights are won by shouting. Some are won by being steady, holding your ground, and letting the facts speak for themselves. Clark and I shared a quiet joke one evening as we watched the sunset from our porches. He raised his drink in my direction and said, "Funny how the biggest drama around here now is who stole whose lawn chair at the barbecue." I laughed and raised my own glass. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it was finally ours again, free from fear, free from fake authority. And in its place was a feeling of mutual respect built not on rules but on community. In the end, Karen had tried to build a kingdom out of fences and fines. All I had done was build a gate. And somehow, that made all the difference.